Hey there folks, Troy from IntoDrums.com here with another lesson for you. Now before we get started, if you are hoping to learn some kind of crazy chop or some kind of really cool fill, this is not the lesson for you. I actually won't be even playing a note in this lesson, but I really wanted to do this because I honestly didn't want people out there to make the same mistakes that I made over my career. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about taking care of your gear and things to try and avoid, and some things that you can do that will help maintain your gear for many years to come. While you're taking these tips on board, it can seriously help you avoid heartache from losing gear that you love and also forking out thousands of dollars that you probably didn't need to. Now, I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to start working in the industry from the age of 15. And in that time, I have made so many mistakes with regards to maintenance of gear and just looking after stuff. And there's certain little things that you can do that will totally change the longevity of your equipment, and a few little smart things that I learned along the way that will hopefully help make your gear last a lot longer. Now, unfortunately, over the years, I have been guilty of breaking a lot of cymbals. Now, with the exception of the set that I have behind me right here, I have actually broken every single cymbal I've ever owned except for my ride cymbal. Totally honest, this is not a badge of honor. This is not something you should be proud of. This was because of poor technique, poor cymbal care, and ultimately overplaying the cymbals and hitting them harder than they would naturally go. Now, early on, I was told something that I didn't quite let sink in fully until it had cost me a lot of money in replacing gear. But that is that drums and cymbals only go up to a certain volume. No matter how hard you hit them after that, they're not going to go any louder. So any excess energy you're putting into those is just going towards breaking them. An interesting side note on that is that if you actually overplay the drum or cymbal, you're going to choke the sound. So it's actually going to have the opposite effect. It's going to sound quieter than if you played it a little bit softer and just below that threshold. It actually forces the drum and cymbal not to sing as well as it normally would. So just keep that in mind, and we're going to come back to this point a bit later in the video. Now, one of the most fundamental and probably easiest overlooked aspect is to have your drums and cymbals in a place where they're easily accessible and easy reached, and it's actually easy for you to play them the correct way. Now, you may have noticed that I've got some really odd angles on my kit, and the number one reason is because I've set the kit up for me, okay? I sit quite high on the drums. I have my stool all the way up as high as it will go, and I'm quite tall. I'm 6'3", so I don't like cymbals being up high. If I did like cymbals being up high, I would have them angled much differently. But I actually like having my cymbals low because I feel it just makes it easier for me to reach. And, you know, playing for a long time, personally, I don't want to be overexerting myself if I don't have to. At the end of the day, the desired result is achieved. Well, why do I need to be swinging for the fences every time I want to hit a crash? Again, just my perspective, but that's how I am. So in order to make it so I could play these cymbals correctly, I've changed the angle. Now, the old mentality of this was never have your cymbals sitting up because you're going to hit them on the edge. That it reigns true. If you do have your cymbals up high and you've got them angled away from you like I do, then you're going to risk hitting them on the edge. I've got my cymbals quite low, so when I'm sitting high, so when I'm playing, I'm actually still playing on a downwards motion and I'm hitting the cymbals correctly. Therefore, I'm really limiting the amount of damage that I could do to the cymbal. So when you're playing the cymbal, you don't want to go through the cymbal, you want to go across the cymbal. And that's just going to make sure that the cymbal can breathe and resonate, and you're not going to be exerting too much force straight into the cymbal. There's an awesome video with Mike Mangini where they use high-speed cameras to show what happens to a cymbal and the way it reacts and stuff. I'll leave a link in the description. It's awesome. And it really does give you a better perspective of what happens when you hit the cymbal. And it will change the way you perceive what's going on when you do hit that cymbal. And the next point is equally as important. Try not to clamp down your cymbals. One of the most common things I see a lot of young players especially do is they get to a drum kit and they say that the cymbals are loose and the wing nut on top is quite loose. And they go, oh, let me fix this. And they tighten it right up and the cymbal doesn't move. There's no movement in the cymbal. What's going to happen then is you're going to hit it and the cymbal's got nowhere to move. So it's going to put more pressure on the end and more pressure around in the hole. And you're going to cause cracks in the cymbal. So what you want is you actually want your cymbal to move around freely. This is really important in allowing the cymbal to resonate freely and to absorb a lot of the impact that's going on. When you do clamp them down too tight and the cymbal isn't allowed to move, that's going to put a lot more pressure on certain areas of the cymbal, and you're going to be more susceptible to cracks, which will split and eventually run and then you've got a totally unusable cymbal and you need to get rid of it. So avoid clamping them. Your cymbals don't really need to be clamped down tight at all. In fact, with most bigger cymbals, you don't even need the wing nut on top. Now, when I was 18 and started at music school, drum kits were provided to the school, but we all had to bring our own cymbals in when we were going to perform. One of the first things that jumped out at me was there were no wing nuts or felts on the top of the cymbals. So there was a felt underneath the cymbal, but not on top. And I thought, well, this is crazy. How am I going to stop my cymbals from jumping off? But here's the thing. Bigger cymbals don't actually need the wing nut on top. They're heavy enough to hold onto the stand, even when you hit them quite hard. So honestly, it wasn't really necessary to have the wing nut on top of the crash cymbal or the ride cymbal because they weren't going anywhere. The only cymbal I really found that you needed to have a wing nut on top for was maybe something small like a splash, just because it didn't have the extra weight in there to hold it down. So when you did hit it, you did have a chance of it jumping off. But again, it really depended on the size of the cymbal. And if you did put a wing nut on top, you only needed a couple turns on top and that was fine. The cymbal wouldn't go anywhere after that. So make sure that your cymbals are free and loose and you won't have a problem there. The next thing you want to avoid is metal on metal contact. So when you put a cymbal on a stand, you've got the metal cymbal stand coming out. You want a spacer or something that stops the cymbal metal and the stand metal from touching. So often especially on high-end stands, you've got a nylon sleeve. And a nylon sleeve is simply the plastic part that goes in between the cymbal and the cymbal stand. That is going to make a massive difference on the longevity of your cymbals. If you've got a threaded cymbal arm touching a cymbal and the cymbal's moving up and down, that's going to act like a file and it's going to file away at the cymbal and you're going to get what's called keyholing. Now the problem with keyholing is you end up with a part of the cymbal that is rubbing and it ends up getting deeper and deeper and it ends up sitting in that spot. Then your cymbals are going to sit in one spot and you're going to tend to hit them in the same spot all the time, which can really weaken the cymbal over time and can cause some massive problems. It doesn't mean the end of your cymbals, but if you can avoid it, it will make a massive difference in the longevity of your cymbals. If your cymbal stands don't have the nylon sleeve and you want to avoid metal to metal contact, my suggestion would be to get some electrical tape and wrap it a few times around the stand. And that will just act as an insulator against that and cause no metal. You're touching then like a plastic rubber onto the cymbal and it's much, much better. Even on your high-end hi-hat stands, I tend to wrap a little bit of tape around the middle, especially if there isn't that space where it's just metal and there's no thread. Like on good hi-hat stands, you've got a little gap there and there's no thread, and that's where your cymbal is supposed to sit. I will still get a bit of electrical tape and just wrap it around just to avoid that metal on metal contact, but that's probably me just being overly cautious. Now this next point is going to touch back on our first one, where drums and cymbals only go up to a certain volume. Now, when you're in a gigging situation, if you're on stage and you're playing and you can't hear yourself and you're thinking, man, I can't hear myself, guitar's loud, everything's loud, subconsciously to alleviate that, you're naturally going to want to hit harder. The only problem with this is when you start playing harder because you can't hear yourself, the guitarist is going to think, oh, the drummer's playing louder, I'm going to turn up. And the keyboard player is going to say, oh, I'm going to turn up. And then slowly, everyone gets up and up and up and up. And the stage volume ends up out of control. You're in the same situation, except now it's a lot harder to manage. So that's where microphones come in. Microphones enable you to play at a reasonable volume on stage and have the front of house as loud as it needs to go. It allows you to play with control and allows you to hear everything that you're doing, while hopefully keeping everyone on stage happy. Now in my mid-20s, I was playing about 3 gigs a week in cover bands in Melbourne, and I would constantly be having the same issue of breaking cymbals because I was playing very hard and very loud. Eventually, after the 5th one or so broke, I had had enough and I really stopped and tried to look at why this was happening. And I realized that, yeah, my bass drum and my snare and my toms and everything were mic'd, but I had no overheads. And the problem was I was playing with tracks, so I would be wearing in-ear monitors, so I'd have essentially earplugs in, and I'd be playing and I can hear bits of the drums, but I couldn't hear the cymbals. So naturally, I would hit harder on the cymbals, which brings us back to that first point. They don't go any louder no matter how hard you hit them. So the next step was they broke. So after losing thousands of dollars on new cymbals, I decided to fix the problem. And the way I did this was I spoke to the engineer at the gig and said, what can I do? I'm breaking cymbals and stuff like that. Is there a way that we can make it so I can hear it? And he simply suggested, let's just put an overhead on. I don't need it out the front, so I'm not going to take it. You just plug it straight into your little mixer and it'll give you a general mix. This turned out to be a godsend, because what it ended up doing was not only allowed me to hear a general mix of the stage and my cymbals and everything, but it also allowed me to hear what the singer was saying when you turn around and say, this song is blah, 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 blah. Because one thing I figured was I was not really good at reading lips. And it was really frustrating for the singer as well as myself when he'd turn around and call a song and I had no idea what he was saying. So this really went a long way to help me, not only with the cymbals situation, but just communicating on stage when you got in-ears in. Now this brings me to another point. You may encounter a situation where a sound guy is setting up and they do all the mics in your drums and say, oh, we don't need overheads, we're not going to use them. In that situation, I would suggest that you are really nice about it, but try and insist on having the overheads. Even if they're not going to be going through front of house, it's going to make a massive difference on the way you're going to play on the gig. It's probably more effects if you got in-ears. Nonetheless, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. At the end of the day, you asking for an overhead microphone to capture the cymbals is as much for the sound guy as it is for you. The more comfortable you are with your mix on stage, the less likely you're going to be hassling them during the night. So it makes a big difference for them. And if you're happy and they're happy, everybody's happy. So don't be scared or nervous to ask for an overhead. And lastly, there's one more point that I think a lot of young players overlook. And that is that your drumsticks breaking are a good thing. That's right, your drumsticks breaking are a good thing. Let's think about this. When you're playing your $20 pair of drumsticks on your $3,000 drum kit on your $400 crash cymbal, what would you rather break? Your stick or your cymbal or your nice drums? I'm tipping the stick. I remember years ago a student turning up to a lesson with his new sticks. I'm not going to mention the brand or anything, and you'll probably figure out what brand they are anyway after this. Now, I'm not trying to poo-poo any kind of brand here, but this is something that I just honestly, in my opinion, is ridiculous. Now, the student, who was fantastic, super keen and all that, turned up to his lesson one day with these new sticks and was like, hey Troy, I got these new sticks, how cool are they? And I was like, oh yeah, what are they? They're nice, they're black, they look like plastic or something. And he goes, no, they're carbon fiber. And I was like, oh, it's a bit odd, carbon fiber in a stick. He's going, yeah, and they've got a metal rod through the middle and they'll never break. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, man, they're unreal. They'll never break. I'll never have to buy other drumsticks again. Blah, blah, blah from this super band uses them and they're the best. It's the best idea ever. And I was horrified. I was like, no way. Like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And poor kid, I didn't mean to make him feel bad, but the thing a lot of people overlook is drummers like the drummer he was referring to, who's in one of the biggest bands in the world, who in a night would go through 3 snares because he's broken the snares, and the techs would come out and replace them, or he'd break cymbals and the techs would come and replace them. These guys don't pay for gear, number one, and they've got lots of gear in the background, and if they do break stuff, it's not costing them anything. And they're mega loaded. If you're a mere mortal like me and you're just trying to play your cover gigs and your corporate gigs and whatever gigs you are to pay the bills, the last thing you need is your high-end cymbals breaking, especially when you don't have an endorsement. Now, I've only had an endorsement for the last 5 years of my career, and in that time, I honestly haven't bought that much gear because I haven't needed it, because I've had a lot of it myself. If I buy new gear, it's because it's a treat and I want a new sound. It's not because I've broken something. Or at least I try to make it so it's not like I broke something. And if I'm doing my job right, over the years, I should have thousands of dollars worth of cymbals here that are all usable and ready to go whenever I need them. If I did have a A-grade endorsement and I was getting all this stuff, I honestly still wouldn't be swinging for the fences and doing all this stuff. Now, if you're in a band that needs high energy and all that, and you're smashing stuff, and that's cool. That's cool. As long as you're happy with what you're doing, who cares? If you do break cymbals and you're fine with that and you've got something sorted out where you can get a replacement for free, then go for it. But unfortunately, if you're not in that category, you're going to be facing like thousands of dollars worth of broken gear that you're going to need replaced to then go and do more gigs so you can make some money. So the bottom line is here, you need to be able to play with as much energy as you can and still get the vibe across without breaking your gear. This is totally possible. There's lots of drummers out there who do this. There are lots of gimmicks out there that seem really cool, and unless you know better, you probably will be susceptible to falling into these traps of buying these never breaking sticks. Find a pair of sticks that works for you, that you're comfortable with, and be happy with the fact that they will break and you will need to buy more. Remember, this is a good thing. So just to recap, remember, your drums and cymbals only go up to a certain volume. No matter how hard you hit them after that, they're not going to get any louder. Have your drums and cymbals in reach so it's easy for you to play them correctly. Avoiding metal on metal contact is going to ensure that your cymbals last a lot longer. Remember, if necessary, in band situations, use microphones. Use an overhead so you can hear your cymbals, especially if you've got in-ears. And remember, don't be scared to ask for an overhead, or if one isn't available, bring your own. It'll save you a heck of a lot of headaches in the long run. It'll make the gig more enjoyable for everyone. And it's a good thing that your sticks wear out and break. That's what they're designed to do. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. If you did like it, please hit that thumbs up. And if you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe for more free lessons. I'll be back next week with another video for you. So until then, have a fantastic week. And as always, happy practicing.